Answer should be D. Square root of 16 is 4 times 4 is 16. Answer on this one is 45. Answer on this one is B. Answer on this one should be A. Pick a number from 1 to 20. The winning numbers today should be 2, 5, 9, 14, and 16. The objective today is to simplify complex numbers. Now here's something we have to do before we get into the example. I is an imaginary number. So anytime you see I, you can treat it as if it's a variable, but it always has the same value. I will always have the same value. I will always be equal to the square root of -1. No matter where you see it at, no matter what problem it is, it's always going to be the square root of -1. It does not change. So here's a short review of this. Square root of 6 times square root of 6. If I multiply this by itself, what do I come up with? 6, yes. Because the square root of 6 times square root of 6 is square root of 36, which is 6. So a shortcut is, anytime you see this times itself, it's just the number under the square root sign. What's the answer to this? Square root of 3 times square root of 3 will be 3. What's the answer to this? 10. What's the answer to this? Is what? It would be -1. Anytime you multiply a square root by itself, it's going to be -1. So if we know that I is the square root of -1, then what would I squared be? I squared is the same as I times I. And remember that I is what? The square root of -1. And we just did this one before. What's the square root of -1 times itself? -1. This will never change. Anytime you see I squared, you can automatically equate it to -1. And if you make a list of this as we go along, you can use it as you do the practice problems. If you don't, then you have to go back and do this each time to think to yourself, well, what is I squared? I squared is I times I. It's square root of -1 times square root of -1, which just comes out to be -1. So the I squared is -1. So what is I to the third? I to the third breaks up as I times I times I. Of course, if you have 3 i's multiplied against each other, you already know what I squared is. What was I squared? I squared came out to be what? -1. So you can break this I to the third up as I squared times I. That would be I to the third. You already know what I squared is. It's -1. And anytime you see I, you're never going to go any simpler than that. You're not going to write square root of -1. You're just going to leave it as I. We're never going to simplify anything lower than I. So if you just have -1 times I, your final answer would end up being -I. And this will not change. as long as you keep note that I to the third is a negative I, you don't have to go back and simplify it again. You'll just know it, just like you know the square root of 9 and the square root of 100. So don't make it hard on yourself and have to go back and try to work these out again. So we know that I squared was 1, and we broke it up as I squared times I to get negative 1 times I. Answer is negative I. So now let's find I to the fourth. I to the fourth breaks up as I times I times I times I. What can I simplify those four i's to be? How can I group them together to make it easier on myself? Instead of I to the fourth, what two things could I multiply together to get I to the fourth? Yeah, you could do I squared times I squared. What was I squared that we've already solved for? I squared was negative 1, so you can write down negative 1 times negative 1. What would the answer be for I to the fourth? Just 1, yeah. Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. And this will never change. I to the fourth will always be 1. And if you remember that, then it's going to make it easier on you. So you don't have to keep writing this out every time and thinking to yourself, if I just break it up as I squared, I have to go through all this. Just remember, I to the fourth is 1. So what we did is we broke it up as I squared times I squared. I squared is negative 1, and it's negative 1 times negative 1 to come up with an answer of 1. So here's what we've learned so far. I is the square root of negative 1. You can just leave it as I. We're never going to write the square root of negative 1. I squared is negative 1. I to the third is negative I. I to the fourth is 1. With those items, you can do any simplification of anything like I to the 20th, I to the 15th. As long as you know those basic things, you can break anything up. Alright, so here's example 1. We have I to the sixth. There's more than one way to do this, but can somebody tell me one way that I can break up I to the sixth? There's no one right answer for breaking it up. Yeah. I to the third times I to the third is I to the sixth. From what we did before, what was I to the third? I to the third was negative I, so write it down as negative I times negative I. If I multiplied negative I times negative I, what does that come out to be? Not I. Not 1. Well, break it down. Negative times negative is what? Positive. Okay, so what's I times I? What would the exponent be? I to the first times I to the first. Yeah, I to the first times I to the first is I to the second. Negatives cancel out, and I to the first times I to the first is I to the second. What was I to the second from what we did before? So there's your answer. It's negative 1. Here's another way you could have done the same problem. I to the sixth. You can break that up as I squared times I squared times I squared. I squared is negative 1. 3 negative 1s multiplied together is what? Negative 1. Odd number of negative signs means the answer is negative. Example 2. I to the fifth. Can somebody tell me a way I can break up I to the fifth?
I to the third. I to the second.
Yeah, we can do that. I to the third times I to the second. What was I to the third? Negative I, yeah. And what was I squared? negative 1. If I multiply a negative times a negative, I get what? A positive. Negative times negative is a positive. So they're gone. They cancel out. But what's I times 1? I times 1 would be what? Just I. No. I times 1. Anything times 1 is itself. So it's just I. I times 1 is I. Here's another way you could have broken up the same problem. I to the 5th could have been I to the 4th times I. What's I to the 4th from what we did before? 1. So 1 times I is I. So here's a trick to remember from here on out. I to the 4th is the highest one that you know from memorization so far. So see if you can take out an I to the 4th from something. For example, if I had I to the 11th, I could take out I to the 4th, I to the 4th, and at that point I would have I to the 8th. How many more exponents do I need to make 11? 3. I need 3. So we know I to the 4th is 1. And then we're left with I to the 3rd. What's I to the 3rd from the list that we made before? Negative I. The 1's just cancel out. And the practice problem here is the same as the bonus problem we just finished. It's I to the 4th times I to the 4th, which is 1 times 1. Answer should be 1. On the practice problem, we've learned that I to the 8th is 1, so how about we make it I to the 8th, I to the 1st, which is 1 times I, which would just be positive I. Answer on this one is C. Answer on this one is D. Answer to this one is B. The answer to this one should be D. Example number 3. So you have them all bunched together, and we did this with some of the bonus problems. Things that you already know, two different ways to do this. You can start marking down stuff you already know, or you can just bunch them all together. If you bunch these together, you have 1 and 2 is 3, another 1 is 4, and this is 7. So I to the 7th. Pick out something that you already know. You may already know this one. The one I'm going to pick out is I to the 6th. So I'm going to go I to the 6th times I. I know that I to the 6th is negative 1. And if I'm going to multiply it by I just get a negative I. The other way to go about it would be this. You know that's a negative 1. You know these two combined are a negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. And you know that I to the 3rd is negative I. Here's another one. In this case, you can bunch them all together, which I'll do to start with. 1 and 6 is 7, plus 2 is 9, plus 3 is 12. I to the 12th is an easy one. Why? It's even, and it's also what? Multiple of 4. Yeah, any multiple of 4 is going to be what? 1. Yeah, so we'll have 1. You could have done this. I know that I to the 6th is negative 1. I know this is negative 1. I know this is negative I. And I just know that's I. If I have I times a negative I, it's a negative I squared, which is the same thing as 1. So all of this cancels out with these being double negatives just down to 1. Many different ways you can go about it. Alright, try this one. On the practice problem, we have 1, 3, 4, 5, 6 i's. I to the sixth should be negative 1. Over here, you have one negative sign. So start off with a negative. And then add up the powers of I. 1, 3, 4, 7. Negative I to the seventh. Now that negative sign is really a negative 1. And we can break up I to the seventh as I to the sixth, and then times I. That should be a time sign there. We know that I to the sixth is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, and we just have an I. So the answer is I. Answer should be D.